I was standing on the back patio holding a tray of champagne glasses when my mother looked me up and down and said, "You can watch from outside, Trisha. Failures don't belong in family photos." My name is Trisha Morgan. I was 29 years old, and I felt every one of those years at that moment. The photographer had just called everyone into the garden for the official family picture. My younger sister, Brooke, stood in the center wearing a cream designer dress, glowing like the princess my mother had always trained her to be. My father adjusted his tie and looked somewhere past my shoulder. My cousins went quiet the way people go quiet when they are embarrassed for someone they will not defend. Even the neighbors pretending not to listen turned their heads. I had been invited only to help serve, clean, and stay useful. When I tried to step into the photo, my mother blocked me with one flat hand. "Not today," she said softly. "Today is for people who made something of themselves." I swallowed the humiliation and stepped back onto the grass. Then the guest of honor turned around. Her smile disappeared. And she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Why is the woman who saved this entire event standing outside the picture?" The guest of honor was Evelyn Hart. She was a well-respected philanthropist and the main donor behind that evening's charity celebration. My mother had spent weeks talking about Evelyn the way people talk about royalty. She believed Evelyn's attendance would finally put the Morgan Family Foundation back in good standing with the kind of people my mother spent her life trying to impress. What my mother did not know was that Evelyn and I had already met. Not as family friends. Not through Brooke. Through work. For 8 months, I had been quietly helping Evelyn's team rebuild the charity event after my mother's committee nearly lost every sponsor, every vendor, and the venue itself due to poor planning and unpaid deposits. I had done it all under my professional name, T. Morgan Events. My mother had no idea the outside consultant she kept praising in emails was her own daughter. Evelyn stepped toward me across the garden. She said, "Trisha, come here." My mother's face went the color of old chalk beneath her perfect makeup. The photographer lowered his camera. For the first time in my life, every person in that garden turned to look at me like they were seeing someone they had never bothered to know. The air felt different. So did I. Think about the last time someone took credit for work you quietly did in the background. Did it make you angry right away? Or did it take a while? Sometimes the stealing is so slow and gentle you almost do not notice until you are standing on a back patio holding a tray while your family takes a photo without you. For years, my mother, Caroline Morgan, introduced me as the creative one. But she said it the way people describe a car that keeps breaking down. My sister Brooke was the golden daughter. She had a polished fiancé, a high-paying marketing job, and a mother who announced every achievement before Brooke even finished achieving it. I had dropped out of law school at 24 after panic attacks, debt, and the painful understanding that I had been living someone else's dream my entire life. My mother never forgave me for what she called public embarrassment. She told people I could not handle pressure. What she never mentioned was that I had spent 5 years building a small event planning business from my apartment, starting with birthday dinners and school fundraisers nobody else wanted to rescue. I was not famous. I was not rich. But I was very good at what I did. I had no fancy office and no assistant sending emails on my behalf. What I had was a reputation built slowly and carefully, one rescued event at a time. My clients were non-profits running on tight budgets, schools raising money for supplies, and community groups who needed someone who fixed problems rather than just talked about them. The Morgan Family Foundation was supposed to fund a children's literacy program. My mother had built her social image around running charity events. But lately the events looked more expensive while the programs received less actual money. The hotel deposit had gone unpaid. The florist was threatening to leave. The auction items were not logged correctly. 2 major sponsors were confused about where their donations had gone. Evelyn's assistant found my name through another non-profit event I had organized. She called me, described the chaos, and asked if I could step in quietly. I said yes. I never planned to be discovered. I simply planned to do the job, get paid under my business name, and leave without anyone knowing it was me. But after my mother tried to throw me out of the family photo, leaving quietly no longer felt noble. It felt like cooperation. After Evelyn called me into the garden that afternoon, My mother's recovery was almost impressive. She laughed softly and said, "Oh, Trisha helped with little errands. She has always been good with details." I watched Evelyn's expression shift in the quiet way that happens behind someone's eyes when they have heard exactly the wrong thing. "Little errands," Evelyn said, her voice calm and clear. "Your daughter rebuilt the entire sponsor list. She renegotiated the catering contract. She saved the silent auction when 3 vendors threatened to pull out. She prevented the venue from cancelling 2 weeks before the event." The guests began whispering. Brooke's smile cracked at the corners. She had spent the entire afternoon letting everyone believe she had coordinated the celebration herself. My mother had introduced her all day as the future face of the foundation, and Brooke had not corrected a single word. I looked at my sister and waited. I gave her the chance to speak. She did not take it. Instead, she pressed her champagne glass tighter and said, "Trisha was just assisting the committee." At that moment I understood something I had been avoiding for years. Brooke was not simply favored by our mother. She had learned to survive our family by standing on my back when she needed the height. After the photo, my mother pulled me into the kitchen. The door closed and her face changed completely. The warm smile she wore for guests disappeared. Her voice dropped low and sharp. "You embarrassed me in front of Evelyn Hart," she said. I looked at her before I spoke. "You told me to stand outside because I was a failure." She waved her hand through the air like my words were smoke. Then she told me to keep quiet about my involvement until after the real gala, which was still 10 days away. She explained that Brooke was being considered for a foundation leadership role and that one evening of credit would not hurt me. I almost laughed. One evening. As if my entire life had not already been one long evening of credit passed to Brooke while I stood nearby holding the tray. When I refused, my mother's eyes went flat. "Remember who people believe, Trisha," she said. She always meant herself. That night I went home and opened a folder I had been avoiding. It held every email, every vendor message, every corrected invoice, and every sponsor confirmation from the past 8 months. I had not gathered them to destroy anyone. I had gathered them to make sure I could never be completely erased again. 2 days after the garden celebration, Brooke showed up at my apartment door. She was not there to apologize. She was there to ask for help. Evelyn had praised me publicly, and now Brooke's boss wanted details about her role in the gala planning. Brooke had exaggerated her event experience when applying for a promotion and was terrified of being caught. She sat on my couch in a blazer that cost more than my monthly rent and said, "Can you just say we worked together on it?" I asked her one simple question. "Did we?" She looked away. Then I noticed a garment bag hanging from her arm. It held the cream designer dress she had worn at the garden celebration. She admitted our mother had purchased it using foundation funds and planned to record it as an event presentation wardrobe. My stomach dropped. Until that moment I believed this situation was mostly about stolen credit. Now I understood it was about something much worse. My mother was spending charity money on personal items and hiding the costs inside the event budget. That changed everything. This was no longer a family argument about who got thanked in a speech. This was real money meant for children's literacy programs being used to dress my sister for a garden party. That same evening, my phone rang. The caller introduced himself as Daniel Pierce, the foundation's accountant. His voice had the careful sound of someone choosing every word deliberately. He told me my name had appeared on several budget notes my mother sent him. According to those notes, I had approved certain expenses as official event necessities. I had approved nothing. I had never seen those notes before. Daniel said he was concerned and wanted to be transparent before things went further. He forwarded the records while we were still on the phone. I opened them one by one. The cream dress Brooke wore. A private dinner my mother hosted. Floral upgrades for my mother's house. A photographer for what the notes called publicity assets that had nothing to do with the charity gala. All of it was logged under event expenses. And my name was attached to every approval. My mother had not only tried to erase me from the celebration. She had been quietly writing my name onto spending I had never seen, so that if questions were ever asked, I would be holding the blame. I sat with that understanding for a long moment. The situation had moved past a family disagreement. It had become something with real consequences for real people. Then I called Evelyn. Evelyn picked up on the second ring. I told her there were budget irregularities that needed to be reviewed before the gala moved forward. She went silent on her end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but serious. "I was afraid you were going to say that," she told me. She invited me to her office the following morning. When I arrived, her assistant closed the door quietly. Evelyn told me this was not the first time donors had raised questions about the Morgan Foundation's finances. Nothing had ever been proven, but several sponsors had quietly reduced their support over the years. The events looked increasingly expensive while the actual programs received less each cycle. Evelyn had agreed to attend this year's gala only because she believed fresh leadership was being introduced. I assumed she meant Brooke. Evelyn shook her head slowly. She said my mother had told her I was unstable, unreliable, and difficult to work with. But my actual work had told her something entirely different. She wanted to see me in person, with my family present, to understand the full picture for herself. The garden celebration had been a test. And in front of everyone she cared about impressing, my mother had failed it completely. After leaving Evelyn's office, I drove to see my father at work. Richard Morgan had always been the quieter parent. Growing up, I had mistaken that quietness for kindness. But silence can also be a hiding place, and my father had lived inside his for years. I asked him directly if he knew my mother was spending foundation funds on personal expenses. He rubbed his forehead and said Caroline had always blurred the lines a little during event season. Blurred the lines. That was how people like my father made something wrong sound soft enough to ignore. I asked why he had allowed my mother to treat me the way she had. He said, "Your mother is hard on you because she believes you can take it, Trisha." There it was again. The family explanation that had followed me my whole life. They pushed me hardest because they trusted I would not break. They used my strength as an excuse to keep hurting me. I left his office without raising my voice. But I made one thing clear before I walked out. He could no longer say he did not know. Whatever happened next, he had been told directly by me, face to face. His silence after this point would be a choice he made with full information. My mother called an emergency foundation board meeting 3 days before the gala. She did not invite me. Evelyn did. When I arrived, Caroline was already seated at the head of the table, smiling like a woman who believed she had already won. Brooke sat beside her, eyes pink at the edges, wearing the expression of someone performing sadness. My mother opened by presenting me as a bitter, jealous daughter trying to damage the foundation out of personal resentment toward Brooke. She placed printed screenshots on the table. They were edited email chains made to look like I had pushed vendors toward expensive upgrades and added unnecessary costs to the budget. For 5 full seconds, my body went cold. Then Daniel Pierce cleared his throat. He had brought the original, unedited email logs from the foundation server. He laid them beside my mother's printed versions. The board compared them in silence. Line by line, my mother's edited copies fell apart. Board members stopped looking at me. They started looking at her. The kind of looking that has real weight in it. The kind that does not easily look away. My mother was still smiling, but the smile had changed. It was the smile of someone realizing the room had already decided something without them. My mother recovered the way she always recovered. She did not show panic. She shifted. She said it was a misunderstanding caused by confusing file names, and she blamed stress and her assistant. She argued the board needed to focus on the gala being 3 days away rather than getting pulled into internal confusion. Evelyn requested a temporary spending freeze until every gala expense could be independently reviewed. Daniel supported it. 2 board members agreed. My mother smiled through all of it. But I recognized that smile. It was not accepted. It was the look of someone deciding to find a different way around the same wall. After the meeting, she followed me to the parking lot and waited until we were away from everyone before speaking. "You think Evelyn protects you," she whispered. "She will use you until you are no longer useful. Just like everyone else." I looked at her calmly. "That is the difference between you and me," I said. I already know what being useful costs. You taught me that yourself. She stepped closer. By the night of the gala, she said quietly, no one will remember your name. I walked to my car. I did not answer. Some things do not need a response. They only need to be remembered clearly when the moment comes. 3 days before the gala, I found out about a private sponsor dinner my mother organized without telling Evelyn or any board member. One of the foundation's donors called to ask why the venue had changed and whether the gathering was official. I knew nothing about any venue change. My mother had gathered key donors at an upscale restaurant and was presenting Brooke as the foundation's incoming director. She told the guests I had been removed from planning due to professional concerns. I drove there. Not to cause a scene. I went because real donors were in that room whose money was supposed to reach real children, and they deserved accurate information. When I walked in, Brooke was midway through a speech about literacy programs she had clearly not read before that evening. A donor near the front asked how many children the pilot program had served the previous year. Brooke stopped. The silence stretched. I answered from the back of the room. 462. Every head turned toward me. My mother's expression went very still. One sponsor near the window quietly set his checkbook on the table without opening it. I did not stay long after that. I made sure the right people had my contact information and walked back out into the night. Brooke followed me outside after the dinner ended. She looked less like the golden daughter and more like a woman who had been wearing a costume far past the point when it still fit. She admitted our mother had pressured her into accepting credit because the family needed a clean public face for the foundation. She said she had never wanted the director role. She was afraid of disappointing our mother, and that fear had become stronger than anything else. I asked why disappointing our mother mattered more than what it cost me. That question landed harder than any argument. She was quiet for a long time. Then she told me something I was not prepared to hear. Our mother had been telling Brooke for years that I secretly resented her and would eventually try to hurt her if given the opportunity. My mother had not just stolen credit from me and handed it to Brooke. She had been feeding both of us different fears for years, keeping us divided so she could stay in control of us both. She had turned sisters into strangers on purpose, carefully and patiently, and I had never once suspected that particular part of it until Brooke said it standing in the dark outside a restaurant that smelled like butter and other people's conversations. Brooke cried in the parking lot. When she finally looked up she said, I do not know how to fix this. I told her to start by telling the truth. She agreed to speak honestly at the next board review and explain exactly how our mother had pressured her. For 24 hours I held on to that hope. Then our mother got to her. At the review, Brooke went quiet. She admitted only that roles had been unclear at times and stopped before naming the pressure or the false credit. She folded herself back into something small and managed. Caroline sat across the table looking perfectly satisfied. She had pulled Brooke back just far enough to keep the truth muddy. The board delayed any decision until after the gala, arguing that cancelling would harm the charity more than the foundation itself. It felt like my mother had bought herself more time. Then Evelyn walked to me after the room cleared. She was carrying a sealed envelope and said she had been holding it for a long time and believed I needed to read it now. I took it and felt the weight of it through the paper before I even opened the flap. Whatever was inside had been waiting much longer than I had been looking for answers. Inside the envelope were donor letters, old budget concerns, and a note written on personal stationery I recognized immediately. My grandmother, Alice Morgan, had helped start the foundation before she died. The letter was addressed to the board and marked to be opened if questions ever arose about Caroline's leadership. I read it in the hallway outside the conference room. My grandmother wrote that the foundation was never meant to be a stage for family status or personal image. It was built to reach children whose schools had forgotten them. Then I came to the line that made my throat close. If my granddaughter Tricia ever offers her hand to this work, listen to her. She sees the people Caroline only performs compassion toward. I had never known my grandmother wrote those words. I had never known she saw me that clearly. I had spent years carrying my mother's version of who I was. And the whole time my grandmother had been watching quietly from a different angle. Evelyn told me Alice had sent her a personal copy years before she died, afraid the foundation would lose its real purpose without someone watching over it. My mother had spent years calling me a failure. My grandmother had trusted me with the foundation's future before I had ever thought to ask. The night of the gala arrived dressed in gold lighting, white flowers, and expensive quiet. 200 guests filled the hotel ballroom. They laughed and clinked glasses without knowing how close everything had come to collapsing in the weeks before. My mother moved through the room like a woman untouchable. Brooke walked beside her, pale and silent. My father stood near the bar looking like a man who had watched a storm building for years and only now realized he had helped stack the clouds. I worked from behind the scenes, confirming with vendors and checking timing with the kitchen staff. I was there to make sure the children's literacy program received the evening it had been promised, regardless of what my family was doing nearby. Then the hotel manager pulled me quietly to one side. The final catering balance had not been paid. My mother had assured everyone it was handled. If payment was not confirmed within 30 minutes, dinner service would be delayed in front of 200 guests. My mother had left one final problem for me to find. The question was whether I would solve it invisibly again, protecting her while she stood at the front of the room that I had quietly held together, or whether I would finally do something different. I stood in the corridor and thought carefully. The old version of me would have paid the balance myself, quietly, without telling anyone. I had done exactly that kind of thing my whole life. I fixed problems silently so the people who created them never had to face them. But paying that balance would have meant hiding one more thing my mother had done wrong. It would have meant protecting her at the cost of the truth. I did not pay it. Instead, I asked the hotel manager for 20 minutes. I found Evelyn. I found Daniel. I found the board chair. I brought all three into a small private office and showed them the payment records. The funds existed. They had been moved by my mother into something labeled a presentation reserve that only she controlled. Daniel confirmed the transfer. The board chair authorized an emergency payment from the correct foundation account, documented in writing with 3 witnesses. Dinner service started on time. The guests never knew anything had happened. But the board knew every detail. Evelyn looked at me when we walked back into the ballroom and said, "You saved the gala without covering the lie." I held on to those words for the rest of the night and for a long time after that. After dinner, my mother walked onto the stage. The lights caught her the way she had always wanted lights to catch her. She wore a dark gown and her best smile and began the speech she had prepared for weeks. She praised family legacy, sacrifice, and dedication. Then she said the foundation needed leadership untainted by bitterness, and every person who knew the real story understood exactly who she meant. My hands went cold. She was about to name Brooke as the foundation's future director in front of 200 people. Then Brooke stood up. She pushed her chair back before my mother could finish the next sentence. Her voice shook at first, but it carried all the way to the back of the room. "I cannot accept credit for work I did not do." The ballroom went completely still. My mother froze behind the podium. Brooke turned and looked directly at me. "Trisha saved this gala. I should have said that from the beginning." For one real moment the truth stood alone in that room without anyone trying to cover it or soften it. It was the first time in my memory that my sister had chosen honesty over safety. I did not cry, but I breathed differently than I had in a very long time. My mother recovered before most people had time to process what Brooke had said. She leaned into the microphone with a soft, practiced laugh and told guests that Brooke was overwhelmed and emotional and that the evening had been a lot for the whole family. She made my sister's honesty sound like a breakdown. She wrapped cruelty so neatly inside concern that half the room probably believed she was being a caring mother. The other half shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then Evelyn stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She simply looked toward the stage and said, "Caroline, sit down." The room gasped in the quiet way a room gasps when something unexpected happens that everyone instantly recognizes as important. My mother's hand tightened on the podium. Evelyn walked to the stage with the board chair beside her. My mother's smile disappeared for the first time all evening. Because the guest of honor was no longer simply witnessing what was happening in that room. She was about to act on it. There was nothing left that my mother could use to stop her. The audience watched in complete silence. The gala, which had always been my mother's stage, had in one movement become someone else's entirely. Evelyn addressed the room calmly and clearly, without cruelty but without softness either. She told the guests that the foundation had survived the evening because of documented professional work done by Trisha Morgan. She did not expose every financial detail in front of 200 people. But she announced that, effective immediately, the board would begin a formal leadership review and independent financial audit to protect the foundation's mission and its donors' trust. Then she reached into the folder she carried to the stage and read one paragraph aloud from my grandmother's letter. Not the whole thing. Just enough. If my granddaughter Trisha ever offers her hand to this work, listen to her. She sees the people Caroline only performs compassion toward. My mother gripped the edge of the podium. She had spent years building her identity inside the Morgan family name, using it as a crown and a door and a weapon against anyone who challenged her. Now my grandmother's own words, in my grandmother's own handwriting, had lifted that crown off her head in front of everyone she had ever wanted to impress. I sat at my table and did not move. I had not planned this night. I had simply refused to disappear one more time. And it turned out that was more than enough. After the gala, my mother contacted board members privately and told them I had manipulated Brooke, charmed Evelyn, and planned everything to take control of the foundation. She sent messages to donors suggesting the audit was a hostile family argument dressed up as financial concern. But this time nobody needed to take my word against hers. Daniel had the original email records. The board had the catering payment documents. Evelyn had my grandmother's letter and years of quiet observation. 3 board members had witnessed the emergency authorization in writing. And my father gave a written statement confirming he had known Caroline mixed personal and foundation expenses and had failed to intervene. It was not a heroic statement. It came from a man who had finally run out of places to hide. But it was accurate. And accuracy, I had learned, was its own kind of power. My mother had built everything on other people's silence. Every person around her had gone quiet at some point to keep the peace or avoid her anger or protect themselves from the cost of confronting her. Now, one by one, the silence had run out. And without silence holding everything in place, the structure she had spent years building could not stand on its own. Caroline resigned from the foundation before the board could vote to remove her. She released a statement calling it stepping back for the good of the organization. Everyone who had been in that ballroom understood the real reason. Her social circle thinned quickly. The women who had praised her events stopped including her in planning committees. Sponsors who had written checks based on her charm now asked for financial transparency first. Brooke moved out of our parents' house within the month and started seeing a therapist. She told me she had spent so many years performing the role of golden daughter that she had never figured out who she was outside of it. My father apologized to me in the stiff, careful way of a man who had never once practiced being wrong. I accepted what he offered without pretending it erased the years behind us. Then Evelyn called and offered me the chance to lead the foundation's event strategy properly. Paid correctly. Credited openly. Protected by a written contract. My name would not be hidden behind anyone else's. My work would not be borrowed and renamed. I said yes before she finished the sentence. For the first time in a long time, I was not being asked to stay useful from the sidelines. 1 month after the gala, the foundation held a small literacy event at a renovated elementary school library. There were no chandeliers and no champagne. No status guests making speeches about themselves. Just children choosing books from new shelves paid for by the gala money. A photographer came and asked the group to gather for a photo. I stepped back automatically. The reflex was so old and so deep that I did not notice I had done it until it was already done. Then Brooke reached over and took my hand. "Not outside this time," she said quietly. I had to breathe carefully for a moment. Evelyn stood on my other side. My father came in slowly at the far edge of the frame. My mother was not there. The photo was simple and unplanned and nothing like the polished garden shot from the celebration where I had been handed a tray and told to stay useful. The photographer counted down from 3. Nobody asked me to move. Nobody suggested I watch from outside. When the shutter clicked, I was standing in the center of the frame, not to the side of it, not cut out of it entirely. Just there. Present. Counted. Exactly where I should have been from the very beginning of my own story. Months later, the foundation published its annual report. More money went to actual programs than to presentations for the first time in years. Sponsors who had stepped away began returning. Schools expanded their reading programs. Children who had never owned a book went home with their names written inside the front cover. My business grew too. Not because of the drama, but because people had seen what I could do under real pressure without losing my honesty. My mother called once. I looked at my phone until the screen went dark. Not because I was punishing her. I let it go to voicemail because peace sometimes begins with not running back to people who only recognize your value after they lose access to it. The final photo from the school library arrived in my email that afternoon. I looked at it for a long time. There I was, standing in the center. Smiling. Not outside. Not holding someone else's tray while they stood in the frame I had built. My mother once told me failures did not belong in family photos. But she was wrong about which one of us was the failure. The only person who did not belong was the one who needed everyone else to look small so she could feel important. I simply became impossible to erase.